Dr. V. Chandrasekar is working as lecturer in philosophy in the Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda College since 1996. He has been awarded the degree of PhD by the University of Madras for his work in the area Yoga and Analytical Psychology. He has been teaching Indian philosophy, Western philosophy, and recent European philosophy for undergraduate and postgraduate students. He has participated in many seminars and presented papers in a variety of topics. He has also reviewed 2 books in ethics and Indian culture published by the Tamil Nadu Textbook Society for Plus 2 course.
Welcome to the UGC series of lectures in philosophy, Greek philosophy part 14. In the last class, I started off our discussions with respect to a system of philosophy called sophism. Sophism, I also told you, marks the beginning of the second period of Greek philosophy. That is, Greek philosophy, if you want, can be characterized into 3 periods, namely the ancient period, that is a pre-Socratic period, the second period which comprises of the philosophies of Sophis, Socrates and others, and of course up till Aristotle, and the third period which starts after Aristotle. Now, last class when I was talking to you about sophism, I said that sophism marked the beginning of the second period of philosophy. Why? That is where I have given the title, of course given by the UGC, that is beginnings of mental and moral philosophies, where we are going to deal with Sophis, Socrates and others. Now, what is this beginnings of mental and moral philosophy? Before this period, we saw the philosophies of the Ionians, namely the people from Miletus, Thales, Anaximander and Anaximenes, and of course from Elia, Parmenides and then Heraclitus, who are all dealing with what the reality is and how the reality has taken shape into this world. But now this period is very important in the sense that it is not going to talk of what the reality is, it is not going to talk of how the world has come into existence. Instead, it is going to talk of the position of man. In fact, I told you earlier that while the pre-Socratic period was interested in cosmology, namely the origin of the world, this particular period can be characterized as identifying the position of man. Before going into in detail about this particular system, let me just highlight about the points that we discussed in the last class. We discussed the meaning of sophism, that is, sophism means wise man. In fact, wise man here means one who talks more about the human affairs. It is not only with respect to talking high philosophy, but what is essential and what is needed to man. That is the first thing that we discussed last time. Secondly, introduction of the sophists as a class of intellectuals who taught courses on virtue. Virtue meant capacity of man to perform functions successfully in the state. Now, we also saw how the sophists were considered to be teachers of virtue, that is, they taught what virtue is. Virtue, when we talk of it, we should not mistake it to be how we understand it in ethics today, but then in the time of the sophists, the term virtue was understood in a different manner, in the sense that it was founded to be the capacity of a man to perform successfully in the state. That is how the sophists characterized the term virtue. Then we saw the important sophists, namely Protagoras, Gorgias, Hippias. Then sophists as against earlier philosophies. This where you see here earlier philosophy, that was in the time of Anaxagoras, can be characterized as an antithesis between matter and mind. That is, when we dealt with Anaxagoras, I told you that Anaxagoras in his cosmology brings in a new element called the mind, and he says that it is the mind which is responsible for the matter to mix together. That is when the antithesis between mind and matter started in philosophy. That was one area which is very pertinent here. Secondly, if you see the slide here, we have the cosmology as against place of man. In the pre-Socratic period, philosophers were more interested in bringing out the cosmology, that is the origin of the world. But here in the second period, especially with Sophis, and of course Socrates and others, they are going to talk of what man's position is in this world, how he ought to behave. That is the main characteristic of this period. And next, period of the sophists, characterized by rise of democracy and decay of religion. This is a very important point. The period of the sophists can be characterized by two things, namely the rise of democracy and decay of religion. This is what we were saying in the last class, towards the end of the last class, namely two things. That time philosophy, though was talking of cosmology, was trying to talk of the origin of the world in terms of certain divine powers, but because of the rise of philosophy and science, and of course the rise of democracy in the overall political scene, people started analyzing the realities in terms of natural causes instead of attributing them to gods. That is what we found in the case of the rise of democracy. Moreover, the democracy that we spoke of, in fact I mentioned in the last class, it should not be understood as a representation government, but the Greek city states were very small, in the sense they were even a hamlet was considered to be a country. So even a handful of citizens were considered to be rulers or administrators or legislators. As a result, I told you in the last class that this led to selfishness and the interest of the nation was forgotten. This is one of the main reasons why sophism came into picture. That is what we are going to say later. And of course, the second point, namely the decay of religion. You should all remember one thing: whatever behavior was shown by man could be easily cited with respect to the gods as expounded by the poets. So as a result, whatever action a man does, be it right or wrong, was taken up and understood with respect to an analogy from that of the action of the gods. So as a result, religion was forced to take a back seat at that time. This is the situation in which sophism arose. Moreover, in the next slide you will see the attack on religion on the one hand began with Xenophanes, continued by Heraclitus and Democritus, and on the other hand was also due to the conception of God in Greek thought. The second part I told you. Now first part, namely the attack by Xenophanes, Democritus and Heraclitus. While philosophers were talking of divine powers as being the cause for the world, there were three important philosophers, namely Xenophanes, Democritus and Heraclitus, exposing different kinds of philosophies yet attacking popular religion. So the attack on popular religion by these philosophers, because of the development of philosophy on the one hand, and also because of the conception of gods by the mythologists and poets, led to the decay of religion. And it is in this context that the philosophy of sophism developed, and we should understand this first. The second period of Greek philosophy became one of negative and destructive thought, and every restriction from the moral side, be it custom or law, was taken to be unwarranted restriction upon impulses of man. Now the second period, which I said starts with sophism, can be characterized as one of negative thought. Why? This is because all established laws, customs, all these things were found to be obstructions in the natural functioning of man. Therefore, they were rejecting all these things. That is why it can be held to be destructive. Of course, in the summary also I will tell you about it. And then the sophistic tendency is given here in one line: truth is what I think, the good is what I choose to do. Because of the decay of religion and also the rise of democracy, what happened, I told you in the last class itself that the rise of democracy led to the feeling that everybody is going to legislate for themselves. As a result, whatever I say becomes truth for me, whatever I do becomes good for me. Same thing will be the case with everybody else, and that is why we can say that this particular statement characterizes this sophistic tendency. Now Who were the sophists? Sophists were professional philosophers. Of course, I should tell you one thing here. I am going to say that they are professional philosophers in one sense and not professional philosophers in another sense. Let me tell you, explain it to you now. They are professional philosophers in the sense that they were teachers and educators, to be precise. In the sense that they are teachers and educators, they are philosophers. That is, they taught man as to how they should live. Second point, they took pupils and gave lectures on what was in demand, and for which they even charged fees. Now, as I told you, they were educators. So, what happened was they could gather some students and taught to them what they needed most, whatever they need maybe, whether it is in a political scene or an ethical scene, whatever it is, they just taught man what he needed at that pointer. And another thing that is a important point at this point of philosophy, namely that they charged fees for it. Prior to them, knowledge was imparted by the teachers to the students without any fees. Of course, even in the case of Socrates, we will see that he did not preach for the sake of gaining money. He spoke philosophy, he taught students philosophy, but he did not take money. But the important fact with respect to sophists is that they charged fees, in fact sometimes even exorbitant fees, because they were trying to teach what is essential for man. So, whatever man needed they taught, of course with the tag of some prize money for that. And next, the rise of the sophists can be identified with the need of knowledge for gaining success in the world, especially political. Now, you will understand why they charged. That is, they charged for their teachings because their teaching was meant for the success of the man, especially in the political field and also in every other field, of course. But then, since they were intent upon helping man to succeed, they were also taking money for that. Earlier on, if you see, philosophers are talking of reality, they are trying to teach mankind about what reality is and how he ought to understand it. They did not take money, but here are a group of people who are teaching man how to lead successfully, and that I can tell you paved the way for them also to start earning through that kind of educating people. So, that is an important aspect with respect to this particular period. With this, when teachers started taking money for their teachings. Next, the sophists did not construct any system of thought, can find loose tendencies of thought. Now, this point is a very familiar point with respect to philosophy in general, and of course, it is the case with respect to sophists, in the sense that all philosophical movements do not have particular type of system. In the sense, there may be different set of philosophers talking in that particular area, but then they cannot be comprised into one single compartment, say stating that this kind of philosophy, because what we find is only loosely constructed thought structures which have one particular line of thinking which will be common. So, that kind of commonality can be found among the thinkers, but we cannot say that they can be taken together. This is an important point with respect to all philosophical movements, and it is more so with respect to the sophists. I told you an important point, namely that sophism cannot be taken up as a fully constructed system, but then there are loose tendencies of thoughts. Moreover, for sophists, I also told you that they are professional teachers, and while I told you about that, I also told you that I am going to say that sophists are not professional philosophers in another sense. Let me tell you about it now. We will go to the slide now. So, this is the particular point I was referring. Sophists were not professional philosophers in the technical sense of the term. That is, they did not specialize in the problems of philosophy, but purely practical men teaching what was mostly in demand. Now, do you get it? Professional philosophy, when I say here, deals with, in the technical sense, deals with certain important problems, namely with respect to what reality is, what life is, what the world is. Now, sophists are not at all concerned with these questions, and it is in this respect they are not professional philosophy in the technical sense. Of course, as I told you earlier, they are philosophers in the sense that they are educators and teachers, but then they cannot be characterized as philosophers in the technical sense, because they were not dealing with the type of thinking that was undertaken by the philosophers in general, be it in the past or in the present. That is why they cannot be characterized as philosophers in the technical sense. And now, what did they teach? See, I told you about 3 or 4 thinkers in the sophism, namely Protagoras, Gorgias and Prodicus, Hippias. Now, see what they have taught. Protagoras taught principles of success as a politician, while Gorgias taught rhetoric and politics. Prodicus taught grammar, Hippias taught mathematics, history and physics. This slide will be enough for you to understand why sophism cannot be taken up to be a constructed system and loosely constructed thought, in the sense that each philosopher who have been termed as sophists, namely Prodicus or Protagoras or Hippias, they spoke differently for different reasons. As I told you earlier, they only spoke about what was in need for man, what was in demand by man. If somebody wanted to be successful in politics, he was taught how to be successful in politics. If somebody wanted to be successful in something else, he was taught how he should be successful in that. So, this is an important point. Therefore, they were more interested in making man successful in whatever they do, rather than telling him that he should know what the reality is. That is an important point. This is the common point why Protagoras, Hippias, Prodicus and others have been termed to be sophists. They did not speak on the same lines. One spoke on grammar, one spoke on politics, one spoke on language, yet they were called sophists. That is an important point here. Therefore, it is said that the sophists are teachers of virtue. Virtue here means capacity of a person to perform his functions successfully in the state. We can conclude that the sophists undertook trained men to be virtuous in order to be successful. It is here I should tell you that sophists were teaching what virtue is. Virtue need not be taken up to be as righteous or good conduct, but it was understood by them to be successful in whatever a person does. That is the conclusion which we can come to here. Moreover, whatever we perform, we should perform it to the utmost capacity. This is what was understood to be virtue by the sophists. The earliest known sophist is Protagoras, around 490 BC they say. He was born in this place called Abdera. You know, again I should tell you, all these parts which are now different countries like Turkey, Sicily, Italy and others were originally taken to be Greece. And as I told you, the rise of democracy. While talking of the rise of democracy, I said that each city state was a country. So, now we understand why it was, because it was all totally in different areas, and that is the reason why the countries were different, and yet they were called as Greece for that matter. Now, who is the Protagoras? What is his contribution? Famous contribution of Protagoras: man is the measure of all things. Now, why did I go to Protagoras? In our understanding of sophists, the sophist philosophy, one particular thing is mentioned, and that is the term man is the measure of all things. The person who said that is Protagoras. This characterizes this particular line characterizes the full philosophy of Protagoras and also the tendency of sophism. The famous contribution of Protagoras can be brought out in his statement, namely, man is the measure of all things. Why is this famous? This is famous because this characterizes the full philosophy of Protagoras on the one hand, and it even tells you the tendency of the sophist. So, I told you earlier that position of man became the main point of discussion in the second period. This particular statement by Protagoras reveals that. Number 2, he was born at Abdera about 480 BC. Actually, there is a discussion, some books say 418, some books says 490. Wandered from place to place, settled in Athens, but charged with atheism because of his book on God. There are 2 books that the fragments of which are available. One is Truth, the other one is On God. Now, I told you even in some of the earlier classes that the easiest way to bring down the importance of a person is to charge of atheism against him. This is the case with respect to earlier Greek philosophy. The same thing happened with respect to Protagoras also, because of his understanding of God in one of his books, namely On God. What he says, let me take you to the slide now. Said he was wandering from place to place, settled in Athens, but charged with atheism because of his book on God. And in that book he writes, as for gods, I am unable to say whether they exist or whether they do not exist. See, in that book on God, of course the full book is not available, only fragments were available. In that there is a statement which says that about God, I do not know whether they exist. This is enough for his detractors to put him down on charge that he is atheistic. That was an important aspect of Protagoras, and of course this was developed by Gorgias in a different manner. And I should tell you, all this philosophy always depends on its predecessors or the preceding philosophies. Same is the case with respect to Protagoras and others who are going to come after him, because they developed their philosophy with respect to the philosophy that happened earlier to them. Let me just continue now. Meaning of Protagoras' statement. The statement, man is the measure of all things, should be understood as each individual man is a standard of what is true to him, and that there is no truth except his sensations and impressions. Going by the thought of Heraclitus that everything is changing, and of course the thought of Zeno, who spoke on about motion, there was a feeling that nothing is known by anybody. This particular statement should be understood in that context. This particular statement should be understood in that context, in the sense that each individual man was taken to be a standard unto himself. In the sense, there is no objective standard. That is the conclusion we can come to, and that every sensation and impression of every man is important to that man. This is the conclusion we can come to with respect to this particular statement. Of course, when you say man is a measure of all things, it does not deal with mankind in general, but with individual men. Now, the context of this statement. Protagoras denied the distinction between sense and reason as believed by early Greeks, who held that truth is to be found by reason and not sense. Before Protagoras, there were thinkers, be it Parmenides or Heraclitus, who spoke about being and becoming respectively, yet both of them came to the conclusion that truth can be understood only by reason and not by sense. Protagoras was against this distinction of sense and reason. And secondly, the common observation and teaching of Heraclitus suggested to him that truth is dependent on individual subject. Now, his understanding of Heraclitus made him come to the conclusion that truth is dependent on the individual and not on an objective standard. It is with this respect that Protagoras continued, and this was developed by later thinkers like Gorgias and other sophists, and was applied in the realm of politics and ethics, which will form part of our discussion in the next few classes. Before that, let me just give you a summary of what we did so far. Sophists were of respectable nature. They contributed to advance of learning. Number 2, they were the founders of the science of rhetoric, first to study words. Of course, this is very important because I told you that they were concerned with the success in politics. Success in politics deals more with words, and that is why they were the founders of rhetoric, I can say. Next, they were responsible for the spread of education and study of ethical ideas. And now let me take you to model questions. Analyze the merits and demerits of the surface philosophy. Bring out the contribution of the sophists towards the spread of education. The merits and demerits of surface philosophy, I showed you in one of the slides how the philosophy of the surface was useful for the people to be successful, and of course also as to how this particular type of philosophy characterized the destructive thought process during the second period, and that is the merits and demerits, which of course we will be also dealing with later. With this we will come to a close for this class. Let us meet in the next class. Thank you.